don't know how to read another.
I think they have AI that's like live translation. I mean, I don't know if like you can have it, but they made it, right? That's what I heard. Although this might be like the time that my nephew told me there are trees on the moon, and I was like, oh, I don't think so. And he's like, no, science put them up there. And I was like, I'm driving right now, so I can't Google that. But
Right, I'll take your word for that.
let's see.
But at the same time, I'm like, I don't even know.
No, you just know.
It's actually neither of those. I'm keep guessing.
I don't know how to say it.
And
Starts with an E,
Yeah,
and
it's an echidna.
Yeah.
Yeah, isn't it cool?
Why'd you say that, Michelle?
Because I've heard that one. I mean, I do not know what like that.
I only know because they got that weird nose looking up. It kind of scared me.
Yeah, I didn't pull up a picture of it because it felt a little X-rated, but they also have like 4 penises.
Oh,
You know,
It's like 4 prongs, kind of, or something. Anyway, there's some weird stuff out there in the animal kingdom.
I just want to know what
Yeah.
like what part of evolution made them evolve that. How like why was that beneficial for them to
had a science never.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Huh? Why not? This is an echidna.
Okay.
Yeah. No, one of my, yeah. So, yeah, today we're talking about mammals. So for those of you who were not here, people want to talk to me, but they can wait. So for those of you who were not here last time, what we did on Friday was we had a little visitor to our class. Yeah, we had puppy time, like
We did.
most of the class. And so while we were playing with the puppy, we were thinking about what possibly could define mammals. So we were looking at some characteristics, and here were some of the questions we developed about mammals to explore in some of our guesses. We're also, look at the puppy, thinking a bit about puppies and cuteness. And so we were coming up with some questions about that as well. And I'm just telling you that because we didn't actually open any slides on Friday, but I had some prepared. So I wanted to show you this historic experiment in foxes. Actually, could you guys tell these are foxes?
No, is that a fox dog?
Yeah. Aren't they cute?
One of the left side looks like a box dog color.
Yeah. So these are right?
Yeah,
It did charge me. I was walking to the dorms inside and it just charged me.
A fox?
Yes.
Maybe it wanted to be
And you know what? That's right.
Into the courtyard.
Actually, yeah, maybe that meant it was sick.
I know, I was, it ran right by, you know.
I would be surprised if either of those. Yeah.
It's almost like a fox is pretty.
I know, it's right, no, or one.
Probably something fair well.
Cause they can form like this side,
Coyotes are on
like towards the door. Like,
Oh no, foxes are great too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's sort of like a little girl.
Mhm.
And
Yeah. They are very cute.
coyotes. I know it because I know there's a coyote that lives on campus. So I remember getting an email and like checking my email and I was like, coyote? Yeah, there's a den behind.
oh my god.
They chirp like all night. I like.
Hmm. The coyote. Huh. Wait, where are they? Sorry.
They're on the backside of there's supposedly a
Okay.
den.
Huh.
I didn't think
I don't even see them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like everybody else sees bears all the time. I see them only once in a while. I'm like, I'm the backyard
Craziest
bear.
thing ever. So.
I have backyard
like,
skunks,
you
so
go
like,
outside, if you go outside Superior, because I went home last
mhm,
and you drive from like there to like Rice Lake, there's
mhm.
like 5 dead bears just chilling on the side of the road.
Serious.
Like people
Wait,
are, like,
wait,
hitting.
wait, specifically where?
Yeah.
Wait, from
Like,
Superior.
I want their bones. So like, where?
There's one,
For what?
like.
Like
just-
research and stuff.
There's one just north of Trago.
And then we'll have examples.
There's one north of Trago that's like just chilling on the side of the road. I'm pretty sure that's, I don't remember if he was there yesterday, cause
Okay.
I don't remember seeing,
Yeah.
but I keep like looking over in the ditch and I'm like, why are there so many bears just chilling outside?
Okay. Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
And I was like, looking
Sometimes
around, I thought it was
consider,
like cow. So like, it's like, you're just north of Trago and there's like a weird like farm, like way out, like, we get a cow, like, this, you know? And then I look down and there's,
would I get in trouble?
I don't know, well, it's marked as an X.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you told me you were coming out for research, I don't think you would get in trouble.
Yeah.
Oh,
Maybe I just call like, who, like, what road crews do you think like clear that stuff out?
I think it's the DNR.
Hmm?
I think it's the DNR, like that office.
Call
I don't
them
think,
and
you
what they
get,
do with
I don't
them.
think you get in trouble because I know if you like hit a deer, you just have to like call in or whatever before you do anything.
Mhm.
You might have to like,
I mean, you might be able to call the DNR, so it doesn't, they might be able to call it.
Yeah. Well, I actually really like their hands. Like their hands are like weirdly kind of human-like.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, wait.
Not like when you look at the paws, but like their bones and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like,
And like,
On this side of the road.
Okay.
Right here off the road.
Okay.
Usually laying right here.
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, there was a bear in the Polish army who like fought and smoked cigarettes.
Really?
Yeah, I think his name was like Wojtek. I think his name was Wojtek. Sorry, those are the two important army things, right? Fighting and smoking cigarettes. Okay. I noticed the sound. Okay. But yeah, so these are Siberian foxes. So back to this. So there's this historical experiment, like this classic experiment in biology that started in Siberia and is still ongoing, where they started trying to domesticate foxes, right? So you can see adult fox and this baby fox here, right? Baby fox is obviously cuter. Here we have these baby foxes, which is how this is linking back up to our puppy questions, right? So this is a experiment where they weren't actually trying to make these foxes so cute. They were just trying to domesticate them. So what they were doing was actually just selecting for tameness, right? They were breeding the friendliest of the foxes. So it started in 1959 in the USSR and it's still ongoing. So this is the same lady with her foxes in 1960 and with one of her foxes in 2015.
She lied today.
I didn't look that up, but probably she doesn't, she doesn't look on the verge of death.
They're only,
8 years ago.
breeding, like,
She looks like, I don't know, like my Polish aunt or something.
are they breeding fox and fox women if they're not breeding like any other dog into it?
Yeah,
Okay,
it's just foxes. So what they were selecting for were these tameness traits. But what they started seeing, even though they were just looking for behavioral traits, is that in less than a decade or so, like they were accidentally also selecting for essentially like cuteness. They started seeing floppy ears and curly tails and changes in color just by selecting for that tameness.
How do they keep the gene pool from like the same
Oh, like
relative?
inbreeding?
Yeah.
I'm sure they
That's
did.
kind of what I'm
I don't know how many they started with. Is kind of the question
like,
there, right? Yeah, I mean they probably were kind of inbreeding them a bit, right?
Maybe
That's
that's
why they
what
have
the
the-
link is.
Is that why they have a third coloration?
Yeah, they started to
Because they
see
had
that
that-
spotting.
Well, like if it's inbreed, because don't like niggers when they inbreed, like, they have like a chance of turning white.
I mean, there are albino tigers, yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
like,
Is that most-
Yeah, so, sorry, like I'm collecting my thoughts. Like maybe because of the inbreeding, but like in general, if you have a small gene pool, right, like what's gonna happen is just you kind of have a better likelihood of expressing recessive traits, right, if they happen to be in that gene pool. So yeah, I think it implies that there were some of those traits somewhere in them. Yeah. And their theory of like what was happening here was that actually like what they were kind of selecting for accidentally when they were selecting the tamest ones and the nicest ones is they were selecting for like puppy traits, right? They were selecting for animals that like were retaining these juvenile characteristics kind of like longer and being more babyish long term. So the degree to which this has been like replicated is subject to debate. So this is a meta study showing like all the different traits in a number of kind of different studies that have kind of done this. But this is a known kind of thing in biology. So it's something called neoteny, when you like retain juvenile characteristics like longer in life. And it's part of like why we are the way we are, right? Like how long a growth period we have where we're children and need to learn and need to be taken care of. So it's kind of cool. And I had a puppy, so this is what I pulled out for you. Okay. So back to our mammals as a group. So here are some mammals. I tried to pull some surprising mammals. So I'll give you a second while we're looking at this. Do you have any like new questions or comments about mammals? It's a pangolin.
So if you look at him standing there like that, he's just like.
I've seen it. I don't think they can come. Aren't they almost extinct?
Yeah, the Chinese like to eat them, I think. So
Chinese rectangular. They're like cool, like rehab programs for them.
yeah, and there's like smuggling of pangolins and everything.
Yeah.
I think I want to do
Well,
It's
Wait.
that. Like, well, he kind of thought that was what we were like, I don't know, like, in the past, we don't do that anymore.
well, like smuggling of what, right? Like I'm sure you knew that like drug smuggling is a thing, right?
Really, yeah, but.
Or like arms.
That's how we get animals.
Yeah, the exotic pet trade involves a fair amount of
Like,
smuggling.
technically illegal, right? Because like they get take back.
Right. I mean,
Mm.
So whether we have that,
Put the box, they do the X-ray of the box, and then they find out that it's supposed to.
Oh.
Don't know how I ended up on that side of the.
Mhm.
Oh my gosh, no, I watched those, it was like the
Yeah.
Australian,
Yeah,
yeah.
I'm always tempted to smuggle things a little bit, just like seeds in my pocket, you know?
And that's how we start.
And that's that.
And then,
Yes.
next thing you know, you have one.
A temptation.
pond, and
Not one.
Now we have a whole thing where.
Yeah.
The Great Lakes.
Yeah, well, the temptation is to take them up to the greenhouse on the roof. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah, TSA is not always that great. I'm not talking about smuggling that, but I keep a like small knife on my keychain, and I realize the number of places I have flown with like a knife just like in my backpack because I forgot it was there. It was most of the time.
Set off any triggers in the.
Clearly not. Like I went home for Thanksgiving just like with my keys in my bag, right? And I forget because it's like shaped like a little leaf, right? Like it's just on there, so when I get packages or something, I can just like open them up.
I guess you put your keys through something anyway, so, you know.
They think there was just another key. Yeah. Didn't look too hard at the
Like,
tape.
that's
Yeah.
crazy.
Oh, no.
Hmm?
It looks like a leaf.
Yeah, someone claims to me when I was saying this last that like you're allowed to have a knife. under an inch and a half, but I don't think that could be true.
I don't think you're allowed.
I don't,
Wait,
because
it's
I don't think they take scissors from you, so I don't, yeah.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
remember they.
knitting
Yeah,
needles.
scissors are-
Once they took the deodorant and claimed that I could have carved out a hole inside, put something in it, and then packed down like
Yeah,
Like
rest
they
of
got
it on
everything
top.
covered except the leaf.
except the weed nugget.
Yeah,
they
You
do.
can't take a full thing of shampoo on there.
yeah.
God forbid.
Also accidentally taking lighters through. I feel like you're probably not supposed to have those on planes.
We're just lucky at.
You know,
Last time,
yeah.
no one- if we tried that, we'd be.
Oh.
yeah.
Oh,
Well, I figure, I'm also lucky because like if they catch me, like I'll just laugh or cry and they'll take it and I'll be
I
fine.
feel like crying.
But you get,
Is
like,
my
terrorism
privilege.
vibes, so.
Yeah,
Oh,
my
like-
dad gets checked at security every single time. And then in his thick accent, it's like, oh, just he's Polish, so he, sounds like he's in the Russian mob or something.
Yeah.
We got audited 3 years in a row.
Oh
when
my
he first
God.
came over.
You know, like the massage, like guns for like the
Mhm.
animals. I have one of those,
Hmm.
and when I was coming like here, I can like stop by security because we have like a gun shape. And I
Mm.
get so scared. Wow.
That'd be.
Yeah, they
I was like probably.
It's real mean.
There's no compassion.
Once they just kept yelling at me to pull down my pants, and I couldn't, like, I wasn't gonna do it, and I
No.
couldn't figure out what they meant. And they were just screaming, they meant for me to unroll the cuffs of my jean shorts. Which I could not do because they were sewn in place also,
Oh.
like, but they just kept yelling at me to pull down my pants. I was like, that's not,
That's
Yeah.
not.
like, if you could do
Like,
that, that's
right
happening in
here,
another
in front of
room, like,
all-
that's not.
That's not.
I think it was the same time.
I
they
feel like
still
the
had
wording on that has to be a little bit better because there's a lawsuit waiting. Yelling,
Hold
"Put
on.
down your pants."
I'm like, how? I'm like, they're like as low as I can go without. Yeah, so, they're doing stuff.
TSA.
Yeah. They take the trouble.
I mean, when you think about it, you have to, okay, like,
Yeah.
you mess up one time, then it's like, you're
Oh,
so in question, and it's like, you're responsible for like 75 people dying, or something like that.
Mm,
Then
mhm.
we already took flag.
I don't feel safer with TSA.
Yeah,
I
right.
gotta tell you.
This problem.
I do remember pre 9/11 airports. It was much nicer. I was
How
small,
free
but
was that?
like,
You just walk in and you-
and people could like take you to your date, right? Like your family could,
Not that
hang
it's
out
like,
with
yeah.
you. My grandparents used to like go for brunch at the airport, and like the kids would run around and watch the planes. Like, it was nice, yeah. Yeah. So, okay. So, question one was, what is this? This is a penguin. Any other questions? Does anything here surprise you that is a mammal?
I mean, kind of like. not really.
Yeah.
Cause like it's.
Because of
scary,
those
I
scales.
wouldn't think it would
Yeah.
be, But,
I have my jewelry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, armadillos are mammals as well.
We talked about the fact that, like,
Mm-hmm. They do
are
that.
penguins, what do you think? Or are they?
I think penguins are good.
oh,
Penguins have
Penguins, that thing, no, that.
oh, that thing. Probably.
Penguins do not wear.
What are they? Are they mammals?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They are mammals.
Baby
for sure.
penguins, also known as pango pup.
Kangaroo pup?
Pango pup.
Are they
Those
cute or are they
mammal,
scary?
class.
They're basically the same, just like,
Ah.
look, their scales are soft, so they're like,
Mhm.
before you get hard.
Cool.
Yeah, so it's like a small.
Oh, they're much related to carnivores.
These are?
Pangolins. Yeah.
Oh my god.
So like cats and dogs
Make it more,
Oh,
and
no.
bears and stuff. They're their own group. So let's do that. But
oh,
Yeah.
my beard is like.
another thing I wanted to point out, I picked some of these images carefully. Do you notice this on the flippers of the manatee?
Yeah, it looks like feet.
Yeah. Yeah, they actually do look like this like thumbnail after thumbnail. So one characteristic that is common in mammals, is having fingernails. Yeah, which is even present on it.
What is like the inside of that flipper? Does it look like an actual like, red?
Or kind of like a
Yeah.
bowling or it turned into a.
Yeah. Yeah. And they're massive. I had one lick me last year. Yeah, I was trying to stay away. Well, I didn't think I was supposed to touch them because you see those like articles about people riding them and getting in trouble and how it hurts them or whatever. But they were there where I was swimming in Florida. And so I was trying to be respectful, but one just like came
One
up.
came up, like, I had no respect.
And I was like, okay, well, I can't touch it, but it can touch me, I guess. The people who live there were trying to convince me to give it belly rubs. They're like, yeah, they are very friendly. They like belly rubs, but they're 400 pounds, so if they roll over, be careful.
Yeah, for real.
It like sounds. What all mammals have like 2 eyes or
Mhm.
at least like a spider has 1 eye. Is there like a thing that has like 2 eyes?
Definitely not more, just two. I was thinking about whether anything has like completely lost their eyes, because like moles and stuff, they're blind ones.
They still have them.
I think they still have them, they're just like functional. Right, they don't like need it.
So it feels like you're using it.
Mhm. Yeah. Actually, did I set that? Yes. Okay. All right. So for our mammals, we're going to go through a bunch of traits. There are lots of things people talk about with mammals as mammal traits. So this list could get very long, or it could be a little shorter. So we're going to start with some of the things that are most clear cut. But in a lot of our groups, when you're picking characteristics of a group, there's like a bigger suite, and like if an animal has like most of them, that's kind of good enough or indicative of being part of that group, because we can have reversions where certain lineages lose traits or mutate and evolve past those traits. So that's why you'll see like different types of lists with different numbers of characteristics on them. But the one for which they are named is the fact that they have mammary glands. So really defining characteristic of mammals is that they drink milk. So here we can see what that looks like in some different animals, including a manatee over here. Okay. And you guys remember we did this like the first day of class. This is why it said mammals suck at the top, is that this is therefore also kind of a defining characteristic of mammals. The website that came up with this competition is called Mammals Suck Milk, because suckling and adaptations for suckling are also definitive mammal traits. We don't have lactation in that way in any of our other groups. The closest we have is like some birds have something called crop milk, so they have like glands in their throat where I think they like regurgitate something kind of milk-like to their babies, but that's it. So mammary glands and milk as we think about it is specific to mammals. So when we think about milk, we might want to think about like what that is, right? So usually when we think about milk, is everybody kind of thinking about like food? Pretty much. Yeah. So that is one of the components of milk. So we've got carbohydrates, fat, proteins, vitamins, minerals in there. But there's actually a lot of other stuff going on in milk as well. Milk can be really complex, like it can vary throughout the day, definitely vary between species. There are some species that have like boy milk and girl milk, like they alter milk composition in sort of complex, interrelated physiological, hormonal, immunological systems. So it's really this communication between mother and baby and really adapted for what that infant needs at that specific time in life. So one of the other really important components of milk is that it's got all sorts of immunological function here. So we have like antimicrobial stuff in there. We've got anti-inflammatory stuff in there, all sorts of things that modulate the immune system, leukocytes like white blood cells. So there's really immune protection coming from milk. Mhm.
Why do we sell like cow milk the most? Like, have the biggest like, concentration of these things? Like, is that why it's most popular in like markets or
Versus,
like any other milk? Or is it just because it's easiest to farm?
right. I mean, I think we sell cow milk because we have lots of cows, right? Because what other milk?
Because I know like.
Goat milk,
is
sheep
popular
milk.
in other places.
Yeah.
But like also cows are like a big meat eating thing, so
Hmm.
it's more like
Right.
meat, I feel like that.
I mean, don't milk is
Practically.
Yeah. We've also like bred cows to make milk
And-
cream, which
And it probably has something to do with like our farming practices,
I definitely.
right? Because like sheep and goats, they kind of, like often the way they're raised is, you just kind of let them go eat food, right? And they're sort of like communal grazing often, and you need to take them like from field to field, or
Good.
at least like societies where there's lots of like traditional goat herding and
Yeah.
stuff. Whereas like we have kind of like set out farms with boundaries and so yeah, I would say it's not so much the composition of the milk as it is the farming practices, but I don't know that
Yeah,
for sure.
what I found is that it's like the cows that have been bred for milk and make so much of it.
Mm,
And it's
yeah.
not by.
And they are big, right?
Yeah. But like for someone just, like a farmer providing for their family, they say like a goat is just one type.
Because
For goat milk.
it's smaller and easier to
Yeah.
feed.
Cows produce like
And you have to milk
7
them so
gallons of milk
often,
every
right?
24 hours.
twice a day.
Yeah.
I
They
did.
produce like
Yeah.
5 gallons, a time.
Oh.
Actually, really, milk them, but they milk twice a day. And they, it's like, it can be anywhere from 5 to 15 gallons, a cow.
So I guess the answer is maybe that we've really bred them really well for their milk production.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why we pick cows. Yeah,
I wouldn't say it's
better.
at all.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Sorry, I'm now trying to think about like where wild cows would have been versus wild goats and sheep also,
Well, no,
because
it's like,
to
I know-
drink the milk of other species, we had to evolve to produce like digestive enzymes that can
Yeah.
like throughout life, right? Like that's why a lot of people are lactose intolerant, is like it's actually a step in evolution that you continue to produce lactase throughout your life as opposed to just as a child. So there are plenty of people that haven't like that don't have that trait for as long. Okay, so immune components, right? In cow's milk, they are giving the cows all sorts of like antibiotics and stuff, right? So like this is separate from that. This is like natural immune components, right? So this table on the side is showing kind of where some of these components of milk come from. So milk is a secretion, so something your body is making and like pushing out of the body. And we have other types of secretion, like think about like snot, right? You got like mucus glands and stuff in your body as well. So some of the components of milk are coming from similar ways as mucus secretion. So that's what this is showing straight across. Some of the components are coming from basically adaptations of things that are in your blood. And then some of these things are specific to milk, but probably come from some of the things that were originally produced by mucus glands early in the evolution of mammals. And here we can see a picture from a paper that I pulled, just kind of showing, going into some of that immunological function, like where this is happening and how this is happening. So our next question then is like, why, right? So in us, in modern groups, right, like the main thing we think about milk for is nutritional, because it's really important nutrition for mammals, for babies, but we don't think of it necessarily how milk started. I mean, it's one hypothesis, but it's not the leading one. So I'm going to tell you that most of the leading hypotheses have to do with the idea that like early in mammal evolution or precursors to mammals, we would have had egg-laying groups, right? Which is why platypuses and echidnas like still lay eggs, right? So actually, you don't have to have live birth to be a mammal, right? So our mammal precursors would have had eggs. And we think that maybe they had kind of thin, papery shells on those eggs rather than like the heavily mineralized bird eggs that we often think about. So what do you think? What do you think it would do if you put something like milk on the outside of an egg? Like, why would you do that? What could it do for you? Add a layer. Hmm.
Like, sort of,
Like when it dries up.
yeah. And other, or even like.
Mhm. Any other ideas?
Like when you have one fiber.
So nutritional, but in a different way. Yeah, so that is one of the hypotheses. So the people who think it's nutritional kind of think it would have worked that way. I'm going to show you the other lists of hypotheses that people have come up with, and we can kind of work backwards and kind of think through what they're thinking. So how do you think it could help with thermoregulation? Why do you think someone might have suggested that? Mhm.
Contact with egg.
Mhm. Mhm. And can you remember when we got on a tangent about like scuba suits? Um, what do you remember something about like liquid and temperature? Hmm? Yeah, so like some of the thermoregulation stuff, like in addition to milk potentially being warm, is like liquids like transfer heat well, right? So the people who suggest thermoregulation are suggesting partially that transferring heat and also like, you know, when you sweat, do you guys know what the point of sweat is? Yeah, how does it do that? Yeah, when it evaporates out, right? So those are two different ways you might have effects of like liquid on an egg in terms of thermoregulation. Like it could be that like while the mother is on top, right, like a thin liquid layer like helps transfer that heat, or it could be when she's not there, like maybe that helps cooling as well in the way that sweat does. Yeah.
Just something to find out, yeah.
Right, exactly what they need. So what about the second one, preventing desiccation? What would that just like mean? The desiccation is what? Yeah, drying out specifically for deterioration. Um, and this is kind of the point of evolving the amniotic egg in the first place, right? So our amphibian eggs are covered in like a gel, right? So they like really, really dry out. When we develop the amniotic egg with its internal layers, right, we're kind of helping prevent desiccation. So basically this hypothesis is not that the milk was like crystallizing to form an extra layer, but basically that like would act as like a moisturizer, right? So depending on the components, just like kind of slathering lotion on the eggs, essentially on the outside. Another suggestion is that because of all the hormonal stuff involved and all these complex processes that we have in modern milk, that maybe the milk had something to do with like pheromones and making sure that the mother was like attracted to come back to the eggs and take care of them. So some kind of like bonding and signaling in that way. And then the fourth one comes back to that modern function of milk too, where we have that immune protection, right? We have now all these antimicrobial agents and immune components to modern milk that maybe that was the start rather than the like nutritional portion, but like actually getting some of that immune function out onto those eggs and protecting them as they're sitting around being incubated and then there are mammals that do weird stuff for immune function, right? Like it's important that baby sloths get covered in their mother's poop, right? To provide like some of the initial immune function, right? Like it's a dirty world out there, but like staying safe from pathogens is really important for survival, right? So those are some of the ideas. Okay. Now on the baby side, this also makes a difference. So mammals produce milk, so they lactate, but also on the infant side, mammals are evolved to suckle, right? So almost all mammals have nipples. The exception is actually going to be our monotremes like the platypus and echidna. Okay. But the rest of us suckle. So we see adaptations in many mammal groups that have to do with this kind of anatomy of the throat and the tongue and the mouth. Because what has to happen here is to suckle, you have to create suction, right? So you have to latch on with the lips and the gums. And so mammal lips are often different. They're more like separate from the rest of the mouth and they're flexible and movable. And that has to do partially with being able to suckle, being able to create that seal so that when the tongue lowers, this creates kind of like a vacuum, right? So this is pulling milk into the mouth, funneling milk to the back of the baby's mouth, where it then goes down the throat and we have swallowing. A particular characteristic of mammals that we can see in skeletal anatomy, because a lot of the things that we think about when we think about mammals, right? Like, how do you know if a fossil produced milk? Right, that's like kind of hard. So there are some bony characteristics we can look at. And so one is the structure of the palate, kind of. So the palate is the roof of your mouth. And mammals specifically have modifications to their palate. They have a secondary palate that is related to this kind of suckling function. These changes here allow for this sucking of milk. Okay. So here we can just see some differences. This is just to point out that there's a difference in the palate of a reptile versus a mammal. You can see we have a different structure here, right? We've got like a front and a back. I think the dotted line is probably supposed to be the soft tissue area. So this would be the part more associated with like swallowing. And this is a picture of your hyoid bone, which is the bone like right here in your neck, like above your larynx, so like above the Adam's apple roughly. This is a bone that's really important for speech and breathing in us, but it's also a point of attachment for a lot of neck and throat muscles. So this looks different in mammals than it does in, say, reptiles as well. They have it, but it's very simple because they don't need all these same sort of complex mechanisms for sucking milk. So these are some kind of clues we can look at in the skeleton. And here's just a hypothesis about like how we had the development of the mammary glands. So showing this surface epithelium with this mucosal function, leading then to sort of mucus type skin glands, and then experiencing further branching and changing some of those chemicals that our mucus glands are producing in order to create the lactating mammary gland of a mammal. Okay. So a weird group, I'm not going to quite say exception, are our monotremes. So the echidna from the opening slide is a monotreme, and so is the platypus. So the thing about the monotremes is that they don't have nipples, but they are mammals, and one of our really good definitive mammal characteristics is milk. So they actually do still produce milk, even though they don't have nipples and therefore don't really suckle. The baby's more lap, right? So they lay eggs. They have their little baby platypuses that hatch out of them. And in the monotremes, they do still have glands like under the skin. So what happens is that the milk just kind of oozes onto the skin, into some grooves, and then also onto the fur of the mother platypus. So sometimes people refer to platypuses as like sweating milk because that's kind of what's happening. So then the babies like lick the fur essentially to get the milk off. Whether this is like kind of a basal condition or whether they've secondarily lost this suckling anatomy is something that someone could debate. We often look to monotremes to think about what the first mammal would have looked like just because they're so weird, right? Like with their eggs and their weird milk and stuff. But a recent paper I saw was suggesting that like also has to do with their weird mouths, but to eat hard foods and develop these beaks, right? How would a beak suckle? So it has recently been suggested that maybe at some point they did have the right structures, but I kind of secondarily lost them. Okay. So when we're thinking about the evolution of mammals, we want to know kind of like time-wise when our traits were arising. And as we were talking about what could define a mammal, like what are our traits, I was noticing that some of our suggestions, right, like are true of mammals, but are true of other things too, because they're arising earlier in evolution, right? Like earlier splits of our lineage. So we're gonna take a trip back and kind of trace out how we're getting to this point of mammal evolution. Okay, so way back, right? We were starting with our fish, right? We looked at lobe-finned fishes, then we started to see things coming out of those watery environments and onto land, right? That was what gave us our tetrapod, right? So do you remember what makes a tetrapod? Or what does that name mean? Yeah, 4 limbs. So one thing we were talking about on Friday was how many limbs do mammals have? They do have 4 because they're tetrapods. So they're coming from this lineage where we have 4 limbs. And actually, this is also where we get the basal condition of 5 fingers from. So the tetrapods that survive and go on to produce our modern lineages have 5 digits on each of them. So I'm being careful about my words here. Some of our mammals are going to have fewer digits, right? Like fewer fingers because they have lost some of those 5 digits. But the only case in which you'll see more is if there's been some kind of recent mutation. Like, do you guys know about Hemingway's cat? You want to look up a picture of a polydactyl cat. They're kind of cool. They have an extra finger. They got like an extra thumb. When I was in grad school, there was a neighbor of mine who had one, and we just like free them in the like hallway of the apartment. So I didn't know whose cat this was, and I named it Thumbs because it had thumbs, which is pretty cool. But that's a mutation specifically in those cats because it's kind of dominant when it arises. So there'll be 6-fingered cats. Yeah, pretty cool. And if you ever go to Hemingway had a house that has been preserved historically in Key West in Florida, and they have let his pet cat just like go gangbusters. So they're like at any given time there are like 100 cats living at this house, and specifically what he kept were polydactyl cats. So it's very interesting. A really high proportion of them, not all of them, because the cats are allowed to do whatever they want with their cats. But a really high proportion of them have 6 fingers. Okay, so in our tetrapods, where we're getting this trait of having 4 limbs and 5 fingers. Then we're going to go into our amniotes, which is where we start to see internal fertilization was part of how we were able to develop our new type of egg laying, right? Fish and amphibians are able to lay eggs and then have them fertilized by just like sperm kind of like being in the water, right? Amniotes don't do that. They lay an egg that is fertilized and has this internal environment for the growing embryo. And then we move into our synapsids, which are going to give rise eventually to our mammals. So we're going to keep going through. This is showing on the side here. Oops. But that didn't go left. Okay. An idea about like what the structure of the glands leading to mammary glands might have looked like at some of these points in time. Okay. So in terms of time scaling this, the tetrapods were evolving in the Devonian, right? The Devonian was like our age of fishes. Tetrapods start coming onto land. We had that really good transitional fossil Tiktaalik that showed us some fish characteristics and some tetrapod land characteristics, kind of time stamping that transition for us. And we have the amniotes evolving in the Paleozoic era, specifically during the Carboniferous period. So those amniote ancestors would have started with some kind of anapsid-like condition. So when we're thinking about our amniotes, we pay a lot of attention to how many holes there are in their skull. So we're looking at the orbit here and a little nostril. Okay. So anapsids possibly had their own lineage that continued and then kind of died off. But the 2 surviving groups that descended from those early anapsid ancestors are our synapsids. So the mammals and their ancestors are only going to have one hole, one temporal fenestra behind the orbit, whereas our diapsids are the groups we've been thinking about more recently, because this is going to include our reptiles, our birds, our dinosaurs, right? So all those archosaurs. So all the groups we've been talking about in our last unit were on this diapsid lineage, where we have that orbit and then 2 holes behind it. So 2 additional kind of fenestrae here behind. And when we talked about dinosaurs, we talked about how they developed another hole in front of the orbit as well. So these are the 2 surviving lineages of those early amniotic groups. So we talked about diapsids before. Now we're going to be going through what happened to the synapsids. So we've mostly been kind of ignoring them to this point, but they did have a number of radiations during the time periods we've been talking about. So during the Permian, we actually had kind of dominance of some of these synapsid ancestors. So particularly in the Permian, one thing that we saw was pelycosaurs like Dimetrodon. And this was around the same time period as we had like weird rock-related stuff, other reptiles kind of radiating during this time period as well. So taking a look, so this was the figure you had of Dimetrodon on your exam. So we have these reptile-like ancestors of pelycosaurs aren't direct ancestors of mammals, but more closely related to mammals than they are to things like dinosaurs, because we're on the way down the split. We've already split synapsids from diapsids. So things we could have looked at in this Dimetrodon, right, is that we see just this one hole behind the orbit, right? That tells us already that this is a synapsid. We could also look at that time period, right? The Permian, the early Permian, right? A way we would know this isn't a dinosaur, that's the early for dinosaurs partially. So this is a time period dominated by other weird reptile-like things, including some of these synapsids that often look more like reptiles than they do like mammals, even though we're much closely related. And we saw in its tip, right, that we didn't have a hole all the way through in the acetabulan, so no, it's not a dinosaur. And here I give you another view of the skull, so you could see that there was really just that one hole behind the orbit. Dimetrodon often looks like a dinosaur because of the way it's portrayed, right, like green and scaly, but in some more modern representations, they've tried to make it look more mammal-like because it is more related to mammals. So when we have colors on these things, right, like those are often just kind of guesses, right? So I think they did a decent job of making the second version more recently look less like a crocodile, right? And look more like it might give rise to something kind of mammal-like. Okay. So that was our pelycosaurs and some of these early synapsids. So then we move into some therapsid groups. So we had some carnivorous type synapsids that then split out into additional groups of weird synapsid type things. So we have cynodonts and dicynodonts are really common in the Triassic, right? So as early dinosaurs are evolving, but before they're prevalent, right? So our dinosaurs were really showing up kind of like late in the Triassic and not becoming really common until the Jurassic and especially the Cretaceous. So in this time period, we have the cynodonts and dicynodonts filling a lot of the roles that dinosaurs later filled. So our cynodonts are the more diverse group that eventually basically gives rise to us. So cynodonts are where we start to see many mammal characteristics. They're a really diverse group. We had carnivores and herbivores. We had differentiated teeth. So we had like a heterodont dentition with multiple different types of teeth, doing lots of different things in the ecosystem. The dicynodonts, the other group, is mainly really herbivores. I think they look kind of, I don't know if you want to argue with me if I say they look like rhinos, but they're herbivores. They had weird beaked jaws and tusks, and these ones definitely go extinct at the end of the Triassic. But while they're around, they're massive, right, and prevalent and eating a lot of the vegetation, right? So they're our main herbivore early in the Mesozoic. So we can see on this tree here some of these branches, right? So we're looking at where some of these traits are arising, right? So in our synapsids, we're creating that lateral opening in the skull. As we move forward in time, we start to see changes to the teeth, changes to the palate moving forward. therapsids, we see expansions in jaw musculature, we see a change to gait to be more upright rather than kind of sprawling out side to side like reptiles. We also start to see some comments about the brain coming on here. As we think about mammals, we will think about like brain size and cognition as well. The cerebellum here is kind of part of your brain, expanding during this time period. We're saying onto the cynodont. Here's where we start to see some changes to the lower jaw. So the dentary bone is going to be in the lower jaw. You can see the post-dentary bones are getting changed as well, more tooth stuff, secondary palate stuff. So these characteristics that we're associating nowadays, right, with suckling, right? So these are some indications that things are changing about the mouth as we're moving forward. And we'll move into our mammals, but we can see more of our mammal characteristics kind of showing up along here. So we can come back to that as we talk about our mammal groups. Okay. So mammals in the like strict sense do arise in the Triassic. So these are called our Therian mammals. So our early Therians are arising sometime around here, and they were likely nocturnal insectivores, or at least a lot of them. So why do you think you might want to be a nocturnal insectivore as we're going into the Triassic? And then you can see them splitting and expanding, right? Like later in the Jurassic and in the Cretaceous. So why do you think that might be a good niche to fill? What would happen if you were up in the day? Yeah, exactly. So like as we're seeing this expansion of these Therian mammals, this is as dinosaurs are taking over. We got a bunch of big scary carnivores. Dinosaurs were probably mostly active during the day. There's some indication that they did have some ability to temperature regulate, but you really need to be able to definitively regulate your temperature like really well to be awake and hunting and active at night. So part of the idea here is that nighttime and eating insects is kind of going to protect you as a Therian mammal in these later parts of the Mesozoic. So our mammals are eventually going to divide into three groups. So our weirdest ones are monotremes. So they branch off first. Exactly when, not totally sure. We need to find good fossils for this to date that split, right? We only have about 5 species of monotremes, including the platypus and echidna alive today. And then of those Therians, we're going to split out into marsupials, so mammals with pouches, so things like kangaroos, and wallabies, and possums, as well as into our placental mammals that have live birth and a placenta, as the name would suggest. So marsupials with their pouches give birth to really underdeveloped young and don't have that placental structure, and they have a lot of weird characteristics themselves that we can talk about. Okay. So when we're thinking about behavior that's guiding the evolution of mammals, you were here and saw the puppy. Saw how it was everywhere, right? Like a very wiggly, right? Getting into everything. This is actually kind of a characteristic of mammals, kind of driving it. Like obviously, we're not the only things that are sprightly and active, but it actually is kind of special to us, right? Like lizards kind of lie around sometimes, right? So we're maintaining high levels of activity in our mammalian groups, and we have mammals awake during the night, during the day, in all sorts of environments. So mammalian characteristics are kind of driven by this need to keep energy going and keep your temperature regulated in all these many environments and different conditions. Second, do you know what these sperm whales are doing?
Sleeping.
Yeah, isn't that cool? So they are mammals. They're sleeping upright in the dark in the water. Yeah. So mammals do weird stuff. So in relation to that nocturnal behavior and those different environments, it's important that mammals are endothermic. So mammals are warm-blooded. They're not the only thing that's warm-blooded. Birds are also warm-blooded. We have some debates about exactly what dinosaurs are doing. But it's important that mammals are able to regulate that internal body temperature through their metabolism, right? So like breaking down things like glucose, making ATP, producing heat. Very different than ectothermic animals, which can't do that same thing. So ectothermic animals are going to kind of be the same temperature as whatever their environment is, right? That's why they like to lay in the sun or on warm rocks and stuff like that, because the way that they can regulate their temperature is really through behavior, right? Like what they do. They can go to a warm place, but they can't make themselves warm from the inside. Okay, so we'll leave that here then. So that's it.